Welcome to this special interview for VarthaBharati. Today, our guest is Paranjoy Guha Thakurta. Those who follow oligarchy, political economy, and Gautam Adani saga must be familiar with Paranjoy's name. Yet, let me introduce him first. Paranjoy Guha Thakurta is an writer, an author, a filmmaker, a TV presenter, a podcaster, and he wears so many hats. Between 2016 and 17, he edited India's top-notch publications, the Economic and Political Weekly. During that period, he wrote many exclusive stories about the exponential growth of Gautam Adani after Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister. His works were prominently mentioned in Hindenburg research that triggered the collapse of Adani's share values. In this interview, Paranjoy will tell us about the Adani saga, the Hindenburg research, and the corporate control over the media and many other issues. Welcome, Paranjoy, to this interview.
Thank you so much, Amiruddin, for having me on this channel, and thank you to all the viewers of VarthaBharati.
Let me start by asking you this straight question. You wrote many stories on Gautam Adani. So, what made you curious about Adani Group?
I've been a journalist for the last 45 years, and I'm a student of the political economy of India, and I've worked for several media organizations where I've written about and tracked the working of business groups and the intersection of business and politics in India. More than 9 years ago, I wrote a book called Gas Wars, Crony Capitalism and the Ambanis. I've written several articles on the major business groups in India. But approximately 7 years ago, in 2015, the Adani Group started becoming very big. In a way, that is what differentiates the Adani Group from many other business groups like the Tatas, the Birlas, the Ambanis, various other groups, that their rise has been truly spectacular. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, nobody had heard the name of Mr. Gautam Adani. And he was just one more trader in diamonds in Mumbai's Jhaveri Bazaar. His family had a relatively small factory making plastic products. And then to become India's richest man, Asia's richest man, and then the world's second richest man and the world's third richest man, that rise has been truly spectacular and unprecedented. And equally spectacular and equally surprising was when, after that report, the 32,000 word report was brought out by a short-selling firm based in New York in the US, Hindenburg Research. Once that report came out, there was a dramatic decline in the market prices of the shares of the publicly listed companies in the Adani Group. There is one other area in which the Adani Group is different from other big business conglomerates in India. Whether it be the Birlas, the Tatas, the Ambanis, they all have widely diversified interests. Their business interests are across several industries. So does the Adani Group's interests. But I dare say it's wider than the others, and very prominently in the infrastructure, from seaports, special economic zone, to operating airports, to power projects, electricity generating projects using both coal and renewable sources of energy. India's biggest importer of coal is the Adani Group. India's biggest mine developer and operator in India in the private sector is the Adani Group. In terms of generation of electricity, only the public sector NTPC, the National Thermal Power Corporation, is bigger. In terms of coal mining, only the public sector Coal India Limited is bigger. And that's not all. As I said, seaports, airports, city gas distribution, roads, defense equipment from drones like UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, road projects, real estate projects, including the redevelopment of Dharavi, which is one of the biggest real estate or projects of its kind anywhere in the world, the urban renewal projects. And that's not all. Cement,
Yeah.
distribution of apples, edible oils, the Fortune brand of edible oils. So his presence is across so many sectors, and I haven't even touched on all of them. His presence is in different countries: Australia, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal. He tried to set up a major port in Myanmar. He was not successful. He's operating Israel's second largest port. He's borrowed money from a controversial bank in Russia. He has strong business interests with his associates in China. When I say China, it's mainly Taiwan, the Republic of China, which India doesn't recognize as an independent country. It's said to be a part of the People's Republic of China, which is often called mainland China. And Taiwan is seen to be a province of that. India doesn't have separate diplomatic relations. But Mr. Adani's business associates are over there. His older brother and several of his companies, they have a presence or they have business associates in several tax havens, including Mauritius, Cyprus, and many, many other such tax havens. So in that sense, the Adani Group and its rise, its spectacular fall, and its diversification, and I haven't actually mentioned the full list. Grain storage. In bulk storage of grains, it's the second largest after the Food Corporation of India. When you look at media,
Correct.
NDTV, earlier New Delhi Television, is the owner of that is Mr. Adani's group. I've told you about cement. It's the second largest cement producer in India. And the list is very, very long. So in all these respects,
Defense.
I believe
Defense.
absolutely defense. And it's not just drones or UAVs, but other arms. And so that the group and its expansion and its diversification makes it different, I believe, from other corporate groups in India.
Yeah. So you just mentioned about the Hindenburg research, and that took a heavy toll on Adani Group. But in a short span, they managed to come back. So how did they manage to come back? And has the Adani empire fallen?
No, I won't say that. Where the Adani Group was, say, in the middle of January, before the Hindenburg research report, when he was the world's third richest man. For a brief period, he was the world's richest man. If you look at the market capitalization of the major companies in the group whose shares are publicly listed and available, you found that from that level, soon after the Hindenburg research report, it had collapsed by almost around 2/3. In particular entities, it was as much as 3/4. Thereafter, there's been a recovery and there's been new investments that have come in. At the same time, the Adani Group was highly leveraged in terms of debt. So they've had to reduce the debt. And there many of the new projects, their expansion programs have been put on hold. Since again the middle of January, and when we talk in early June, you can say from having lost 2/3, they've recovered some amount. So if it was 100 in the middle of Jan and it had collapsed to 33 in say February, it has come up now to 45 and 55. But the group is not where it was. And Mr. Adani is also not where he was. Whether this fall, where it will end, or is it going to rise gradually, or is it there going to be some new developments or new disclosures that will again make the price of its share? These are very difficult questions to answer because the stock market in India goes up and it goes down. It can be very volatile, as it has been in the past. So I wouldn't say this is the end. No, it's not the end. They're heavily invested in major infrastructure projects, as I mentioned to you.
Yeah.
I mean, they are in ports, 12 seaports across India. They are in airports. They're in ports in Australia, in Indonesia, in Colombo, in Sri Lanka. So I wouldn't say that it's like the end of the empire. No, far from it. But the speed, the rate at which the Adani Group is expanding, that is not happening today. It is getting new investments, but these are compensating for what he has lost after the Hindenburg resort. New debts or new loans are not forthcoming in the same manner. See, I'll give you a few examples to illustrate the point. Total Energies of France had said that it would invest 25% of a green hydrogen project with the Adani Group worth about 12.5 billion US dollars. Now that investment has been placed on hold. We are also not sure about various other projects, how they will progress, and the speed at which they will progress. For instance, there was a major project to make plastic products, PVC like polyvinyl chloride, from coal in Mundra. Now that project also hasn't progressed. Therefore, it's early days. While it is early days to say, oh, this is the end of the Adani story, I'm not even saying that. And but the pace of its expansion has undoubtedly slowed down. Also, foreign investors, international financial institutions, many of them have downgraded the Adani Group's stocks and shares. Its auditors have raised several questions.
Yeah, even the latest one was the Deloitte report, which came out yesterday. I think Bloomberg published a report on that.
There have been several reports. Auditors have qualified several of its half a dozen companies. They're publicly listed companies. And there are many other new developments which indicate that it will be difficult for Mr. Adani to sustain the amazing pace at which the group was expanding. And if, on the other hand, he manages to hold on to what he has, that itself would be a significant achievement. Because after Hindenburg, its report, I don't think the Adani Group has been the same.
Despite Hindenburg flagging so many issues about Adani Group, Indian regulators, they almost gave them a clean sheet. What does this tell us about the regulatory mechanism in our country?
It doesn't speak very highly of the regulatory authorities in India, whether it be the regulator of the financial markets in India, SEBI, or the Securities and Exchange Board of India. There have been several investigations. Some have gone on, some are continuing, some have been stalled, some of them at court, decisions have arrived. These are investigations by the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, the DRI, which is the intelligence wing of the Department of Revenue in the Ministry of Finance, and looking at customs and intelligence issues, looking at invoicing, over invoicing, under invoicing, looking at how funds are allegedly round tripped. I'm not just saying specific to the Adani Group. Generally, that's the role of the DRI. And also, we've seen several investigations by the DRI, or the Department of the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence stalled. We do not know what the Income Tax Department is doing. There have been first information reports submitted by the Central Bureau of Investigation, but once again, it has, you could say, the progress in these investigations are not known. And if you look at SEBI itself, the Securities and Exchange Board of India has been for quite some time now, for more than 2.5 years, almost 3 years, they've been looking at certain offshore entities who are heavily invested in Adani Group companies. These are located in tax havens like Mauritius and Cyprus, in, in other countries, other jurisdictions across the globe, across the globe. They've been looking into their activities. But SEBI has asked the Supreme Court for more time to complete its investigations, and the Supreme Court of India, headed by the Chief Justice of India, Justice Y.V. Chandrachud, has given time to SEBI till the middle of August to complete its investigations. Uh, Meanwhile, there has been, the Supreme Court appointed a committee of experts to look into whether or not there had been regulatory lapses and regulatory failures on the part of SEBI as far as its investigations into the Adani Group are concerned. And that committee presented its report in early May, and that is also now public.
What are the findings? Can you just elaborate on that?
It's not easy to elaborate in an interview like this. The findings, the report itself runs into over 170 pages. But this is my opinion. It's not only my personal opinion, it is an opinion expressed by several other analysts and observers, and that includes Andy Mukherjee of Bloomberg Opinion, Sucheta Dalal of Money Life, Abid Dasgupta and NewsClick, and myself. We believe that this report, by the Supreme Court appointed panel, seemed to have exceeded its remit. And it seems to have turned out to be what people were apprehending and fearing. At one level, this committee has given a lot of advice to the Supreme Court of India about how to interpret the rules and the laws. One could argue that's a job of the Supreme Court and not the committee.
Yeah.
But the committee would argue that this is our remit, this is our job, and we are also showing you where the rules and the laws and how they can be interpreted, and drawn a difference between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, and often talks about things like chicken and egg situation. But that's not all. This particular expert committee report, headed by a former judge of the Supreme Court of India, a retired judge of the Supreme Court of India, also points out the loopholes in the SEBI's own rules. There are a few issues which are at stake. Who is a related party? Is your brother a related party? And if you are working in a publicly listed company, then all related party transactions have to be disclosed.
Yeah, correct.
That's one set of queries. Another set of queries pertain to what are called beneficial owners. Who is the beneficial owner? You have entity A owned by entity B and C and D, and B and C and D are owned by E and F and G and H, and it goes on and on and on. Now, SEBI, after several recommendations by committee, by other expert committees, has, I could argue, diluted its own disclosure requirements and definition of who is the beneficial owner, and what it earlier called the ultimate beneficial owner. In fact, SEBI is choosing to use the definition that has been given in the PMLA, or the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, where the disclosure requirements and the definition of a beneficial owner is far, far less. The disclosure requirements are far less under the PMLA than in the earlier definitions of when you have foreign portfolio investors, FPIs. Earlier, they were expected to make detailed disclosure. So it doesn't stop at the fund manager, the owners of the fund manager, who are the ultimate beneficiaries. Their names are there in the report. Okay. But in a way, what the report highlights, not in so many words, how SEBI has diluted its own rules and regulations, and that will enable its investigations to go really nowhere in trying to ascertain where the money has come from and what is the key contention, what is called minimum public shareholding. If you're a company whose shares are available to the public at large, then the promoters group, with its associates, with its related parties, should not be holding more than 75%. Because you need, according to the SEBI's own rules, about 25% shares to be available in the market in the form of free public float to enable what is called fair price discovery. Now, there are so many issues and so many complex issues, and it seems to me, to return to that question, names have been named. Large number of international financial institutions, their representatives were called to depose before the committee. They didn't come. Members of the public were not asked to depose. They picked and chose who should depose before them, who were the so-called experts who would depose before the so-called experts in this panel. But wait, the story is that we don't know where it's going to happen, what this report will lead to. Therefore, the opposition parties have argued that what you need is a joint parliamentary committee, because that would go beyond the investigations. Take the case of SEBI. SEBI is saying that the DRI or the Income Tax Department or the Enforcement Directorate needs to coordinate with it. But in itself, it can do that much and no more. So we'll have to wait and watch.
Yeah. Let's move on to the media segment at the moment. So, you know that most of the media houses are now being controlled, by and large, controlled or owned by corporate houses. So, in your opinion, how has it affected the media freedom or the media's performance in India?
Amiruddin, this is a huge subject. I can give you a 1 hour lecture on this. I teach this subject at the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad. For the last 19 years, every year, I've been a member of the visiting faculty. To cut the long story short, that big business groups have interest in the media is not new, nor is it unique to India.
Correct.
It has happened over several periods of time.
Yeah.
But one could argue that in the recent past, the major big corporate houses, including the corporate house led by the Ambani family, that's Reliance Industries Limited, their corporate group, after it took over another major media organization, and the recent change in the ownership of New Delhi Television, NDTV, Mr. Mukesh Ambani's firms linked to Mr. Mukesh Ambani and his associates like Mr. Mahendra Nahata were holding a major chunk in the holding company. That in turn held the shares in the publicly listed company NDTV. Now that has changed hands. It's a recent development. The erstwhile promoters of NDTV, Dr. Pranoy Roy and Radhika Roy, they went on record saying that this was a hostile takeover. So once your owner has certain interests, there's a very old saying: "He who pays the piper calls the tune." Yeah. So you cannot expect a media outlet owned by the Adani group to say anything that is considered critical of the Adani group. Similarly, if the Ambanis have a media outlet, you cannot expect that media outlet to write anything or investigate something or put out reports that are critical of the Ambani group. Now, there are media owners and there are media owners. Some are more liberal, some are less liberal. But one could argue that in the recent past, especially in the last 9 years, a larger section of the media has become subservient to those in power.
Exactly.
And the small section of the media that is not subservient, that is asking difficult questions of those who are in positions of power and authority, not only are they being pushed to the margins and the fringes, literally asking their subscribers to give them funds, deprived of advertising support from the central government and other government bodies and public sector undertakings. What is happening is they've also been targeted. by the law enforcing agencies. Look at the number of so-called income tax searches, not just on the BBC offices. Newsclick, News Laundry. There have been several such quote-unquote investigations. All of this has sent a chilling effect. You criticize those who are in positions of power and authority, you are treated as if you're a traitor to the nation, that you are not upholding the fundamental right of every Indian citizen enshrined in Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India, which is the right to free expression. Of course, there's 19(2), which is imposes what are called reasonable restrictions on the right to free expression. Who decides what is reasonable? That's a big contentious issue. But more importantly, the big point is that journalists are being told, if you do not adhere to unwritten rules, then things are, then
we will make your life difficult.
No, I'm not saying make your life, but I'm saying yes, journalists have been targeted. And it's not just Siddiqa Khan, there have been several people against whom first information reports have been lodged, court cases are lodged. You are aware I'm the only Indian citizen against whom the Adani Group has 6 defamation cases that are currently pending in different courts of law, 5 in Gujarat, 1 in Rajasthan. So the law, the judicial process, the law enforcement process, all of them are being used and misused, I would say, to ensure that a larger section of the media does not ask questions that are difficult, does not hold truth to power.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, this culture of subservience has come right from the top. Mr. Narendra Modi is so far the first and the only Prime Minister of India who has not held an unscripted press conference or media conference where journalists could ask him any question. He has picked and chosen the persons who he has granted interviews to. And they're not just journalists, he's granted interviews to at least some unusual personalities. A Canada citizen, a citizen of Canada who's a very well-known film actor, Mr. Akshay Kumar, and he pays a lot of income tax, I was told. And among the various questions that he asked the Honorable Prime Minister of India is, Modi ji, aap aam kaise khate hain? How do you eat your mango? Do you want to cut it and slice it and have it? Or would you like cut the top and then suck the pulp and the juice? I mean, okay, you can argue that this is part of a more light kind of, I won't say frivolous, but a light-hearted interview. But look, when you are interviewing the Prime Minister of India, you should be able to ask him questions. So if Mr. Modi has himself not encouraged a culture of questioning, then how can you call the media the fourth estate? But if the media cannot hold truth to power, if the media cannot ask questions of those who are in power, then what is the media? What is left of the fourth pillar?
Exactly.
And by extension, what does freedom of expression mean under these circumstances?
So, but this was not the case a few years ago. For example, when Bofors scandal, Hindu and Indian Express broke the Bofors scandal story, a lot of media houses followed it up. And then later, in the run-up to 2014 elections, the India Against Corruption movement, every news outlet followed it up and did wonderful stories. Then, but recently, on the Rafale deal, and you have done a wonderful work on that, and your book gives us a lot of details. But in the mainstream media, when after the Hindu published a few stories, no one picked it up. So does this show that the media ownership is the main culprit?
Certainly, that's an important part of what we are seeing today. For your information, Ravi Nair is the principal author of this book on the Rafale deal. It's titled Flying Lies, and the subtitle is about the role of Prime Minister Narendra Modi
Yeah,
in
correct.
India's biggest defense scandal. It runs into more than 500 pages. I'm a co-author. I'm the publisher. It took us almost 5 years to put the book together. That's one. I thought I'll just add to what you
Yeah,
said.
okay, great.
But the point that you have made, which I think is very, very significant, I will say that never since the emergency that was imposed by the government headed by Indira Gandhi from the period June 1975 to a little before March 77 when the elections took place, never have we seen in India such uh, attempts, such concerted attempts by those who are in positions of power to suppress the dissenting voices. Indira Gandhi's government put several journalists behind bars. It was like you kill democracy with one stroke of the knife. But what we are seeing today in India over the last 9 years or so is death of media freedom, death of democracy by 1,000 cuts. And even if relatively few journalists have been put behind bars, like Siddiq Kapan, many have been harassed in different ways, legally, through first information reports. Once their ownership changes, they have to they don't have the support of that infrastructure. Take the case of the person who was the most popular television anchor in the earlier NDTV before Mr. Adani took over, Ravish Kumar. He now has his own YouTube channel. There are several other journalists, but whether or not you can call them as part of the so-called mainstream is another question. You saw the Income Tax Department and other law enforcing agencies during the second wave of COVID raid the premises and the offices of Dainik Bhaskar, which is one of India's most widely circulated daily newspapers and one of the world's most widely circulated daily newspapers. And perhaps you can argue that why was Dainik Bhaskar picked up? Because it was taking positions the government didn't like, including the way the government handled the pandemic and the corpses that were floating in Mother Ganga. So when a journalist or a journalist organization does its job by reporting the truth, by asking questions, then those in power don't like it.
Yeah,
You are
yeah,
promptly
yeah,
dubbed
exactly.
as anti-national. Look at the way the law of sedition, which is a law that was enacted during British colonial times, look at the way it has been used and misused and the number of times it has been misused in the last few years alone.
Correct.
All of it which shows that not only is this government intolerant of its critics, including its critics in the media, and not just its political opponents, it has a vindictive mindset. It wants to take revenge. You see, earlier governments have also not been tolerant. But this government, in my opinion, has been especially vengeful against its critics.
So that created a fear mindset among the media persons, right?
And a chilling effect. I mean, if you take action against A and B and C, you send a message to others, look what we can do to you. That explains several things.
Yeah, correct, correct. So you mentioned about the mainstream media, but I would like to ask you about your stint in EPW, the Economic and Political Weekly, which we all like admire a lot because it's one of the topmost publication in India. So, but when you wrote pieces on Gautam Adani, you were forced to quit, and the owners told you that
You
you
know,
have to take down the article from the website before leaving this room. You mentioned it in a Telegraph interview. So, how is it like, in a publication like EPW, behaving like that? Don't know, because they don't have many skeletons on their cupboard. But how is it? What happened there?
You know, Amiruddin, I've talked about this many times since you've asked me. I'll try and summarize the story in a nutshell. And I don't really look on myself as some sort of a great martyr or a crusader. I was just doing my job. In early 2016, the Samiksha Trust, that owns and publishes the Economic and Political Weekly, decided, in its own wisdom, the board decided to appoint me as an editor with effect from the 1st of April 2016. I put in my papers, I resigned from that post towards the end of July 2017. It's been some time, it's going to be almost 6 years since that happened. Let me quickly recall what happened. In June 2017, I was the principal author with 3 others. We wrote an article which was broadly talked about how the rules pertaining to power projects in special economic zones had changed and had been tweaked over the years, and the biggest beneficiary was Adani Power. So Mr. Adani had a lot to do with what happened after that. But that was not where the story ended. It talked about how the government of India, its various departments and ministries like the Ministry of Finance, like the Department of Commerce, had been processing an application for refund of customs duties without first checking whether that duty had been paid. It's a little more than 500 crore rupees. Now say you pay more income tax, then you apply for a refund to the income tax department, and if the income tax department thinks you have a genuine case, they'll refund the money to you. Now in this case, that money was never, although his application was processed, the money never went to him. And maybe that is why Mr. Adani holds a grudge against me. But the short point is that same article was published in The Wire. And your viewers can read the article. It was published in June of 2017. The headline is Modi government's 500 crore bonanza to Adani Group, something along those lines. They can read it. What happened was a legal notice was sent. I responded to the legal notice. But I was summoned by the Board of Trustees of Samiksha Trust and said, you have responded to a legal notice on behalf of the trust, which is a publisher of the EPW, without our prior approval and consent. And this is an act of grave impropriety. I argued that no, I may have made a mistake. I agree that I made a technical error. I'm willing to apologize for that technical error, but this was not an act of grave impropriety. I was told that I had destroyed the ethos of an institution called the Economic and Political Weekly, which is almost as old as this country. I was told that I was writing articles in my own name, unlike my predecessors, and I should not be writing any more under my name, articles in my name. I was told that a co-editor would be appointed. I was told I should pull that article down immediately from the website. It had not been printed on paper, and not leave that room where I was sitting until that article had been pulled down. That didn't take very long. And then I said, are you satisfied? See, error 404. The article has been pulled down. After that, I asked for a piece of paper. I wrote out my resignation. And I said, please accept it. Then I went and told the whole world about what had happened. I gave interviews, I told everything. And I was overwhelmed with the response I got. Hundreds of people, scholars, activists, journalists, they came out in my support. Nobel laureates like Amartya Sen, Angus Deaton, professors like Noam Chomsky, former finance minister of West Bengal, Dr. Ashok Mitra, they all came out in my support and said that the actions of the Samiksha Trust, they did not support. They supported me rather than him. Quickly coming to towards the end of the story, I'll take a few more minutes of your time since I've gone this far. That legal notice was converted into a case, a civil case. As you know, defamation, there's a civil side to it, there's a criminal side to it. The civil case was heard by a magistrate in Bhuj, the capital of the district of Kutch in Gujarat. The magistrate said, told Wire, because the EPW had pulled down the articles. Told the wire that you don't have to pull down this article, remove one sentence and remove one word. Your readers can check that order out. Then the whole case was appealed against. It's currently pending before a magistrate's court in Mundra. But the criminal case happened only in the Mundra court. Something unusual happened in May 2019. The general elections to the Lok Sabha elections had been completed, but the results were yet to be announced. There's just a small gap of a few days. Mr. Adani's lawyers decided to withdraw the cases against everybody, the entity that runs the wire, my co-authors, everybody except me. Before that, I had appeared in court, physically appeared in court. Then came the pandemic. In between the two waves of the pandemic, in January 2021, a non-bailable warrant of arrest was issued against me by the court of the first-class judicial magistrate in Mundra, Pradeep B. Soni. Interestingly, I got to know about the issuance of that non-bailable warrant through the Press Trust of India. The PTI's correspondent had seen the report even before my lawyer had. So, for 9 nights and 10 days, I did not stay at my home. Because my lawyer said a non-bailable warrant means the cops can come, put handcuffs on you and take you. So I was supposedly a fugitive from the law. Then my lawyer argued before the High Court of Gujarat and Ahmedabad that this was bad in law, that you cannot issue a non-bailable warrant of arrest against me. What was the allegation against me? I did not appear in court. It was in between the two waves of COVID. Courts were closed. Most importantly, the Supreme Court has guidelines which say that for non-appearance in court, you will first have to issue a bailable warrant, and then you can issue a non-bailable warrant. In my case, it hadn't happened. After the execution of that warrant of arrest, non-bailable warrant of arrest, was issued by the High Court of Gujarat, I appeared before the court of the first-class judicial magistrate in Mundra. Aropi Hazir hai? I said, yes, here I am. I appeared in February of 2021, again in March 2021. Since then, nothing seems to have moved.
Okay.
So this is where the case stands. Both the civil case and the defamation case concerning that article, which was first published in the Economic and Political Weekly. But can you imagine what impact it had on my family, my wife, our children, my recently widowed sister? Can you imagine the mental agony they went through? Not just me, my family members.
Exactly.
So this is an example of how the way the law works or does not work, how the process is the punishment.
Exactly.
I can there are two other cases. There were gag orders issued against me for a series of 3 articles published. It was written by Abir Das Gupta and me, published in NewsClick, and the headline was Justice Arun Mishra. He was then a judge of the Supreme Court of India, Arun Kumar Mishra. 8,000 crore parting, within inverted commas, gift to Adani. Now, the Adani Power argued that I had lowered the esteem of the judiciary in the eyes of the people of India by reporting this story in this manner. The gag order was issued against me, against Abir Das Gupta, against NewsClick. We have full respect in the judiciary, but this gag order was issued against all of us in 2020. So what had happened is, after that, there were a series of 3 articles. Prabir Purakasta, the head of NewsClick, he's 75 years old. D. Raghunandan, he had nothing to do with the publication of the article. He's 73 years old. Myself, I'm 67 years old. Abhi, who's much younger than me. We had to appear before the court of the magistrate, the Grameen Nyalay, in a district called Baran, B-A-R-A-N. It's a southern part of Rajasthan. There is a power project by the Adani group, Adani Kawai. It's a place called Kawai where the power project is there. And we appeared before the court. We furnished a bail bond. There were individuals who stood as sureties for us. And this is some distance away. Where we went to, you have to travel from Delhi to Kota, which is kind of halfway between Delhi and Mumbai. And from Kota, we had to travel another 120 odd kilometers to go to the magistrate's court. So this is an example of how the process is the punishment.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I must clarify again and again, I am not criticizing the judiciary. I have full respect in the law. I decided when my name appeared in the Hindenburg research report, I was the only journalist mentioned in that 32,000 word report. And the question that was raised by the Hindenburg research report to the Adani group, they raised 88 questions. In question 84, I have been named. Where they say, Mr. Adani, you say you welcome criticism, you are willing to, respect freedom of expression. Why did you try and get a critical journalist like me arrested? And they gave a reply saying it was the judge and so on and so forth. I felt obliged to speak up because I wanted to clarify the position and give the full details of what had happened.
Yeah, that's correct. So you mentioned a lot of things in this time, but just wanted to ask you, because most of these things are happening now at the moment, like the vendetta politics or actions against the journalists, all these things. So is it because the current dispensation is invincible? Is it because of that?
Look, how can you predict what will happen in the next general elections, which are scheduled to take place in 2024? Anybody is invincible? Was Indira Gandhi invincible? What is the outcome of the results in Karnataka? We are right now sitting in Bengaluru, and what happened in the recently concluded elections to the state legislative assembly in Karnataka? The Bharatiya Janata Party got 36% of the vote 5 years ago, and again on this occasion, but this time it's out of power. Earlier it was in power. We also know the circumstances under which it came to power. So what happens in the time to come is very difficult to predict. I am not a fortune teller. We don't know. We do not know what kind of issues would influence the electorate in the coming general elections. We have state elections happening in at least 3 major states, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. Many things could happen before that. There could be welfare schemes announced by the government, by our Honorable Prime Minister, which will have an influence on voters. Who knows what will happen when the snows melt in the Himalayas next year. We know the impact that the Pulwama incident had before the elections in 2019, and the then governor of Jammu and Kashmir has gone on record saying that the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, was directly responsible for the deaths of 40 Jawans of the CRPF, the Central Reserve Police Force. So we don't know the future. We don't know what can happen, what may happen, and how these events could influence voter preferences and the choice before the election.
So you just mentioned about the Karnataka election, and this is my last question. Basically, you here in Karnataka, what happened was a cash-strapped Congress defeated a cash-rich BJP. So do you think that same model or same results will happen in the 2024 elections?
Again, very difficult question to answer. You will analyze, your organization has analyzed the Karnataka elections better than I. I'm far away in the national capital. I'm in Delhi, in Gurgaon, where I live. But the point is that you are right. I agree with you that the outcome of the Karnataka elections has very important lessons and pointers. Karnataka is not India. Karnataka is not even the southern part of India. One, the limits of money power. Even if the BJP spent huge amounts of money, maybe 10 times more than the Congress came to power. the limits of communalization of politics, Hindu-Muslim politics, the communalization of politics. We know what has happened in Karnataka, from hijab to how you should cut your goat to to Bajrang Bali to Tipu Sultan. Several issues sought to heighten Hindu-Muslim tensions between the two communities, Hindus and Muslims. But that, what kind of impact it had? Let's go further. 36% of the vote, 5 years ago, 36% of the vote. But what happens when the others come together?
Yeah.
That, in terms of sheer mathematics, sheer arithmetic, overwhelms the 36%. Whether that can happen all India is a difficult question to answer. And last but not the least, we have shown several surveys, including ones that have been done by the CSDS, the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, which pointed out clearly what were the issues that mattered to the voters of Karnataka. And among those issues were issues like corruption, 40% corruption, the 40% Sarkar, inflation, and employment. So these are issues that matter. A lot of people have argued, no, these issues don't matter. What matters are emotional reactions, Hindu, Muslim, hijab, etc. But I think Karnataka showed how important are issues like employment, inflation, corruption matter to the ordinary voters. Again, another very interesting aspect of the outcome of the Karnataka elections was the rural-urban divide. You saw that the Bharatiya Janata Party remained very strong in the urban areas, but it weakened in the rural areas. And again, the traditional supporters of parties that were not aligned with the Bharatiya Janata Party or the Indian National Congress, notably the JDS, the Janata Dal Secular, we saw a polarization of the votes. So these, I think, are very important lessons. How important these lessons are or would be for the rest of India, time alone will tell.
Yeah. Let me ask one additional question. Since when we discussed about the mainstream media and the non-mainstream media, so I just want to ask you about, you want to know your thought about how can this non-mainstream media platforms like The Wire, The Scroll, The Newsclick, all these,
Or VarthaBharati.
VarthaBharati, can these alternative platforms
If you
survive?
If you have the support of your viewers, if your websites or your newspapers have the support of the readers, will they contribute? Not just subscribe. Will they contribute? This program is being shown on YouTube.
Yeah.
But YouTube is owned by the Alphabet Group, which also owns Google and its various services. It also owns the Android operating system, which is one of the world's giant digital monopolies. But wait, how much money will you get from YouTube? You don't know. The algorithms don't know. And they will never tell you because they are monopolists. And this is a huge debate, a subject of a bigger discussion maybe on some other occasion. But your subscribers, your viewers, your readers, if they support you, and not only support you, they are willing to contribute for your journalism. They are willing to give some money for your journalism. That's what matters.
So thank you so much, Paranjoy, for this wonderful, excellent conversation.
Thank you, Amiruddin, and I hope the viewers of VarthaBharati would have gained some way or the other, in a small way or the other, from this conversation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.